Jake had owned this property long before the luxury neighborhood appeared next door. His private woe was one thing nobody had ever been allowed to control. One afternoon, Jake noticed something that immediately stopped him in his tracks. Someone had placed a brand new lock on his private well. The notice claimed the neighborhood association had authority over the well. Jake knew immediately that something about the document didn't make sense. Then Linda Crawford appeared with a folder full of HOA paperwork. She calmly told Jake that the neighborhood had new rules about the property. Linda told Jake he could no longer enter the well enclosure without permission. Jake stared at her, realizing the dispute had just become much bigger than a simple lock. Linda wasn't alone. Her husband, Richard, a practicing attorney, stood behind her with another folder. He insisted their interpretation of the neighborhood rules was completely legitimate. Instead of arguing, Jake pulled out his original property survey. The well sat clearly inside his property boundary. Jake spent the evening reviewing every document he had from the original purchase. The paperwork gave him something the HOA didn't have, a clear chain of ownership. The next night, Jake attended the neighborhood meeting. He wanted everyone to hear the same question. Exactly where did the HOA get authority over his private well? Jake stood up and asked one simple question. Show me the document that gives you control of my well. For the first time that evening, nobody had an immediate answer. Richard argued that the neighborhood's shared infrastructure rules covered the well area. Jake asked him to identify the exact recorded document proving that claim. Then another homeowner asked why nobody had ever heard about this supposed rule. The room suddenly became much quieter. That night, Jake found an older subdivision plat in his records. The well parcel was shown separately from the neighborhood's common areas. Jake decided not to rely on guesses. He took his documents to an independent property attorney for a professional review. The attorney found the problem immediately. The HOA documents did not appear to give them ownership of Jake's well. Instead, the neighborhood seemed to be treating an assumption like a legal right. Jake sent a formal written request asking the HOA to explain its authority. He included copies of property records and gave them a reasonable deadline to respond. Linda expected Jake to back down. Instead, the paperwork forced her and Richard to examine their own records much more carefully. Richard searched through the recorded documents looking for the authority they had relied upon. What he found was not what he expected. Their biggest mistake wasn't the lock itself. It was a recorded filing they had relied on, which clearly didn't cover Jake's well. Now the lock was no longer just an inconvenience. It became part of a documented dispute over access to privately owned property. A neutral property official came to review the boundary and documentation. Jake simply showed the records and let the evidence speak for itself. The inspection confirmed what Jake's survey had already shown. The well sat on his private property, outside the HOA's common area. Because the dispute involved access to a water source, local safety officials also wanted the situation documented properly. Their role was simple: make sure the property and access issues were handled safely. The HOA board finally realized how serious the documentation problem had become. Their original claim was now being questioned by the very records they had relied upon. The unauthorized lock was finally removed. Jake didn't celebrate. He simply wanted his property returned to normal. The dispute ended with a written resolution recognizing the property's boundaries and access rights. Jake made sure everything was documented clearly this time. At the next meeting, Linda had to explain what had happened. The homeowners were no longer willing to accept vague claims without seeing the actual documents. A few days later, Jake walked back to his well without anyone stopping him. The property was quiet again, and the fight was finally behind him. Jake learned an important lesson. Paperwork matters when property rights are being questioned, and confidence means very little when the documents tell a different story. The HOA tried to control something that wasn't theirs, and one expensive mistake exposed the entire problem. Jake kept his property, his well, and most importantly, his peace. If you enjoyed this HOA story, like and subscribe for more real estate and neighborhood drama stories. Where are you watching from? Tell me your city and state in the comments.